Chapter 31, Thursday, 7 p.m. Nikki. I watched as Nikki selected 2 bottles of real beer before rummaging through my pantry and then looking into the freezer. Pulling out a large frozen pizza, he read the back of the box. He held it in one hand for a long time before putting it back and pulling out a bag of potato chips from the pantry. He didn't want the kitchen to smell of cooking. I couldn't see his narrow face, nor did I expect to. Experienced soldiers walk slightly hunched over. Professional operatives like Nikki keep their heads lowered when on the job. I watched as he walked out of the kitchen and down the hall. Then he surprised me by going down into the dungeon and showing up a minute later in Agent Martinez's dungeon hideout. He put his feet on the table, glanced at the monitors, and punched something on a propped-up tablet. Opening the bag of chips, he screwed the lid off a beer and began watching something on the tablet. As he reached for a chip, he looked at his hands, then carefully removed a glove. As he munched, he tried to decide what to do with the ungloved hand, clearly worried about accidentally touching something. Finally, with a shrug, he brushed his hand off on his pants and put the glove back on. If he were anyone else, the fact that he left his cap on would indicate that he knew the place had hidden cameras. But I knew his cap was more than a signature. Nicky wore his cap everywhere because, in his business, he couldn't afford to ignore the cameras that now track our lives. Nicky survived by assuming he was watched at all times. Checking the video history, I found that he had arrived while I was meeting with Gibaldi and had a key to the kitchen door. I checked the rest of the cameras. The video feed from the hidden room was how I left it. My block of real-time feed to the FBI was still working. How did Nicky know about the hidden room? And how did he know he could hide there and monitor what was happening upstairs? More to the point, did he know that the surveillance was not real-time, but only uploaded twice a day? I carefully checked to see if the FBI had hacked my hack and was streaming real-time. They weren't. My hack replaced all movement with what happened right before. It had been a quick hack, because their surveillance was not movement-sensitive and required manual scanning. If left in place for more than a day or two, even the FBI would have realized that I was never on any video anywhere in the house. But before I could put something better in place, I had stepped on a snake. The bottom line was that no one but me could watch what was happening inside the mansion. The reality was no one cared much. I was already yesterday's news. Then I remembered what Henry had told me about Gibaldi, and pain coursed through my leg as I sat straight up in the bed. Some of his enemies go to jail, and some just disappear. I groaned loudly and cursed as I waited for someone to come in. When no one showed, I moaned louder. What if I was dying from post-traumatic snakebite? After a while, I returned to work, feeling betrayed by everyone, including my nurses. It all made frightening sense. Nicky showed up right after Gibaldi flew in. Was that why he left the hallway? Was he telling the FBI that the need for surveillance was over? No, that was too crude for an operator like Gibaldi. Most likely, he knew I had hacked it. All it would take was one quick phone call to the right people. People not in the FBI. I told myself I was overanalyzing things, a weakness of most people in my profession. But the thought of a man putting back on a glove to eat potato chips told me none of what I was looking at was coincidental. Also, who hangs around a place with heavy surveillance unless they know it is not working or is being ignored? There was one other thing. I had replayed Nicky entering the house. The guy was a professional. It was possible he could lockpick a damn good security bolt as effortlessly as using a key. Gibaldi had told Kurgan that he would not be back in Denver until after lunch, and Kurgan would be on a plane when Larry took me back to the mansion where Nicky was waiting for me. No wonder Gibaldi jumped at the opportunity when I asked for my passport. What better alibi than trying to give a witness a fighting chance? Sometimes a coincidence is just a coincidence, and sometimes it is circumstantial evidence. I remembered listening to Riley tell Larry she thought I was being set up. That was only, a week before, or had it been more? I was trying to figure it out when Larry materialized at the foot of the bed. He looked at me, his eyes almost apologetic. We just stared at each other for a moment, and then he smiled. "Watching porn on your new computer?" he asked. I kept the lid open and grinned back. "Nothing you haven't seen before." He gave a low laugh and coughed. "So that you know, if you had asked, the one thing I wouldn't have done is misled you. If I knew Nicky was being protected, I probably would have just said I didn't know. I would not have said this. The FBI says he is off the grid, and I don't get any sense they think he is in WITSEC. What does that mean, Larry? He frowned and stared at me, trying to decide how far to go. Paul, before today, I would have said that the guy is dead, which is what happens when you hang out with sociopaths, or he decided to retire. With Nikki's resume, he could be living the life you plan to have as we speak. And now? He frowned. Now? After today, I have to add that he might be protected way above my pay grade. Paul, today was past weird. I never believed the shit I heard about Gibaldi until today. The guy is seriously dangerous. Look, it doesn't matter. You did an amazing thing for Adeline and Mandy. Come on, $15 million? Look, take the rest of the money and get the hell out of the country, okay? I almost turned the laptop around. Larry was right about Gibaldi. He was dangerous. Placing Larry and Riley in his path was no different than asking them to protect me against Nikki, possibly worse. I intended to do more or less what Larry suggested. Disappear. I drug it out with Larry for 2 reasons. He would get suspicious if I gave in too quickly. But mostly, I just wanted to enjoy time with my only friend. After he browbeat me into submission, we reminisced about our road trip. What was that hole in the wall in Trinidad where we damn near had to fight our way out because you kept dancing with that redhead? And you told her runt of a boyfriend to go get some help if he didn't like it? I asked. Larry laughed. Special Shit Lounge. Man, how could you forget that name? That little fuck showed up with his buddies and you finally got off your ass and stepped up. And he went out and brought back more. Fight our way out? Hell, I thought we would have to shoot our fucking way out. Remember the best part? For you? Sure. She snuck over to the motel that night. I laughed. I waited until we finished laughing and drove it home. Special Shit Lounge. After everything we did, that is the night I will remember. He grinned and said, Me too, Paul. I hate to say it, but I missed you after you boogied into the barrio. I know you can always track me down. Maybe we can do another road trip someday. I'll be your wingman. Like you'd have a choice once I get a new look. Besides, I think we both know you're a one-woman man now, I replied. Instead of the token protest I expected, his grin faded to an embarrassed smile. Tell you what, brother, I hope so. The smile remained on his lips, but his eyes, always a window into his soul, faded into sorrow. Don't worry about your ugly mug. Didn't seem to bother Adeline or Mandy one damn bit. They saw the man I've always seen. A fucking asshole. Sorry, couldn't help it. No, Paul, go somewhere no one can ever find you and find someone. I nodded and we both looked away, embarrassed. I didn't protest because I knew he didn't want to defend the idea. I was a time bomb, and we both knew it. He left shortly afterward and caught himself as he was bending down to hug me. He redirected one hand to my shoulder and crushed my hand in a handshake with the other. As he walked out the door, I thought of the question I wished I could ask. When I eavesdropped on him and Riley the night we arrived in Denver, he told her he owed me. I assumed it was because he didn't tell me about Nikki. Maybe someday I could ask him, I thought, and returned to watching Nikki. He was no longer in the room. Frantically flipping through video histories, I missed it the first go-round. Making myself breathe slowly, I scrolled through the history, cursing the morons in the FBI who were too cheap to put in movement-sensitive video cameras. Nikki had returned to the kitchen, grabbed another beer, and then gone to the master bedroom, where there was no surveillance. Instead of putting the laptop on the bedstand, I left it where it was and reclined, suddenly exhausted. Of course, for a while, I checked the damn laptop every 10 minutes before saying, fuck it. That wasn't what made me get less sleep than I had recently become accustomed. I kept seeing Adeline's face, a woman I might have loved. I began to spiral downward as I burned with anger at what Ratched and the Cottonwood HOA put her through. Then I thought of Agent Martinez sitting alone in a hidden basement room, trying to do her job. I was grateful there were no cameras of her when, after degrading her, they told her to stand back along the wall until asked to dance again, and sent her into FBI exile. Somehow, I knew she never let them see the pain they inflicted, which only lengthened her exile. I thought about the man with the body of a penguin, the eyes of a feral cat, and the cheeks of a chipmunk, and how he would continue to play games with people's lives. I didn't care if he was protecting his big game hunting territory, or if he was simply one of the apex predators. Hell, he was probably both. I didn't believe it was all a vast criminal conspiracy. The world was fucked up because there are people who do what they want, simply because they can. I couldn't work up too much sympathy for the players like Driscoll, who probably had no idea what he had walked into, or what a country girl like Nurse Ratched was like in her natural habitat. I suspected he viewed Nurse Ratched as a hapless hick, pretending she belonged with the elite. He had no idea that to her, Driscoll was nothing more than a wolf. And where she came from, the rule about wolves was shoot, shovel, and keep the fuck shut up about it. I ran laps around the World Sucks track until exhaustion overtook me. Then I ran a twisted, confused version in my dreams that was more exhausting, and ended up in the same place over and over, until I was back where I started. I awoke to the sounds of a hospital at night, the nurses' voices at the same level, only fewer of them. Someone was in my room. I opened my eyes to slits and saw faint shadows moving on the bed. They were next to the bed on the monitor side. It made complete sense. Knowing I was watching him, Nicky was coming to me like I had planned, just not where I had expected. I turned my head as slowly as possible. If it was Nicky in a nurse's uniform, he dyed his hair blonde and shrunk to a size 4. She sensed I was looking at her and smiled down at me. "It's okay, Mr. Harding. Everything looks fine," she said, and patted out the door. That I laid awake worrying what the hell she could have been checking on spoke volumes about my state of mind. What do they ever check on? I asked Gabriella more than a few times to show herself if she was in the room. Instead of Gabriella looking back at me in the mirror, a scarred man with frightened eyes stared back. The last thing I remember was pre-dawn light shining into the room. When I opened my eyes, sunlight streamed into the window, and the corridor outside clanged with the activity. The night worries faded, helped by the breakfast, complete with a side order of their pancakes. I was mopping up the syrup the first time my remaining burner phone buzzed. Since retrieving the phone from the pocket of the sweatpants I had worn the day before required setting aside what was arguably the best part of the breakfast, I ignored it. Like all vampires, she was tireless. I picked it up on her 4th try. "Good morning," I chirped. "I was beginning to think you were ghosting me, Mr. Harding," she said in a low, smoky voice. Ghosting was one of the few things I hadn't fantasized about doing with this woman. "No, there were just people in the room. What's up?" I knew what was up. The vampire had completed the doable job of buying Adeline's house. Now she was calling to tell me that the impossible task wouldn't happen in the specified time frame. She would want more time, and I would refuse. When I made the arrangement, I was living on borrowed time. Things had changed, and I now had other plans for the rest of the money I took from Dragna. "I have a document ready for you to sign as we agreed. This has to happen this morning. Don't ask why. Are you ready to do this?" "Why this morning?" I asked, because it sounded better than, "Oh, fuck me." "What part of don't ask don't you get?" When this morning," I corrected myself. "Now would be perfect," she said. "Where are you?" I asked. When she did not reply, I stared at the door to my room. I wouldn't have been surprised if she floated in. Scared, but not surprised. "What the hell does it matter where I am? Look, Harding, what is this shit? I just laid my ass on the line to get you what you asked for in the time frame you set. Don't even think about backing out of this deal." "Who said I was backing out? And if I do, you'll get your fee, so lose the attitude," I said, taking command. "Fuck you. You'll pay more than the fee, a lot more. Look, it's done, and undoing it will cause serious pain to some people I don't want on my ass. And that shit will roll downhill, buddy. So here's what's going to happen. You log in, sign, and do it by noon Denver time. Lose the attitude? Mansplain again, and I'll show you attitude." There was that damn word again. I set the breakfast tray aside and replaced it with my laptop, intending to log in and look at the document. With any luck, there would be problems with it. But I didn't log in. Nicky was back in Martinez's hideout, staring very hard at the surveillance monitor. Seconds later, he and I watched what was happening in the kitchen above him and miles west of me. Another man was reaching into my refrigerator. Larry turned and put the bottles into a box sitting on the kitchen island. When he cleaned it out, he picked it up and went out the door to the driveway. Both Nicky and I leaned back from our monitors, dumbfounded. Who would steal beer at 9 o'clock in the morning? We both leaned forward when Larry entered with a grocery sack in one hand, a bottle I recognized as my favorite dark ale in the other, set both on the island, and began putting bottles of something back into the refrigerator. Then he picked up the bottle and walked to the other end of the island where my tower computer sat. As he guzzled my beer, he studied it. Then he put his bottle down and began looking at the back cover. When he reached for the Leatherman, a slimmer stainless steel version of a Swiss Army knife, I took my hands off my laptop. He unfolded the screwdriver and finished the beer. My hand started to unclench when I realized my .45 automatic pistol was no longer in its holder inside the tower. They clenched again when I remembered that it was in an island drawer, the one Larry was leaning against. Nicky leaned forward and sipped a cup of coffee, his eyes glued to the screen. We watched as Larry, with a shake of his head, folded the screwdriver back into the knife and put the knife back into his small holster. He stepped towards the outside door, stopped and ambled back towards the hallway. Nicky replaced the coffee cup with his Glock. "For fuck's sake, Larry, you can hold it," I pleaded. I fumbled with my burner phone, trying to remember his number. Larry stopped at the doorway and looked down the hall. Nicky was gone. I knew he was on the other side of the dungeon door, just feet from Larry, who continued peering down the hallway. Nicky opened the door and stepped out, holding the Glock in both hands, just as Larry closed the kitchen door behind him. I lifted the laptop to make sure I hadn't just pissed myself. Larry and I both believed in a minimum of a pot of coffee in the morning before our beer. Being on the wagon, I'd finished 2 pots of coffee. "Worried it fell off from lack of use?" Riley stood in the doorway with a plastic bag in her hand and a wry grin on her face. I caught the sack before it landed on my bad leg. "Looks like you're healed. Doctor is on his way to officially spring you. Then I take you back to the haunted house," she said. Inside the bag was a pair of new jeans and a plain black t-shirt. It was pretty much the clothes someone put on to disappear. I looked up. "Thanks. I appreciate this." She nodded and didn't reply, as though she were waiting for something else. Finally, it dawned on me. "So, where is Larry?" She smiled and said, "He had a little errand this morning. Then he and I have a meeting downtown to try and explain what the hell happened yesterday. The good news is that you got your passport. The bad news is that the plane won't land until this afternoon. You need to chill out at the house until we bring it to you. Then we were on strict orders to drop you off anywhere in Denver and disengage." "Disengage?" "Yeah, that's code for dump you on your ass." 40 minutes later, Riley and I were in her SUV and headed west back to the house. I made up my mind while the doctor lectured me about the need for physical therapy, and declined when Riley offered to stop by a drugstore to fill a prescription for pain meds. "I told you, I'm clean, and I'm going to stay that way," I informed her. "Sure, one day at a time. I get it. Good day to start." When I didn't take the bait, she glanced at me and asked, "Why do you keep looking at your watch? You have plans?" "No, just trying to adjust. You ever noticed how hospitals are like casinos? You kind of lose track of time," I replied. Between being a jock and a marshal, Riley had spent almost as much time in a hospital as I had, or so it seemed. We traded horror stories, mine predating my first coma, with tales of doctors breaking bad and never brought up Weeble. We agreed that making fun of doctors is fun mainly because they take themselves too seriously. I think we truly enjoyed each other's company for the first time, because we both knew it would be the last. I believed Riley knew, or at least suspected, the passport was a feint. Also, I had no damn idea why I kept looking at my watch. What was the point? I had decided that I would pay the vampire her fee. If she wanted to hunt me down, she could join the club. Sooner or later, Nicky would get what was coming to him. It sounded good in my head until we arrived at the house at 11:45. Riley surprised me by leaning over and kissing me on the cheek. "Here's the thing, Paul. You have never been charged with any crime. As far as hacking into databases to prove crimes have been committed and aren't being prosecuted, as far as Larry and I are concerned, all that proves is that you're one of the good guys. And we see damn few on either side of the fence these days. So if you get jammed or just need someone to talk to, work your magic, and we're there for you. Okay?" Unable to speak, I could only nod back at the beautiful, intense woman who had showed up on my doorstep in St. Louis. Riley had saved my life, and had not only protected me, but fought her own people on my behalf. I didn't want her within a million miles of the cretin waiting for me in the dungeon. I had to look away when she pulled her errant strand of hair out of her eyes with her little finger. Less than 2 weeks ago, that little movement reminded me of Gabriella. Now, nothing about the amazing person sitting next to me reminded me of my wife. Larry was a very lucky guy. Fortunately for him, he knew it. As I watched her drive away, I made a decision. To hell with all of it. I had never really sought justice. A burning vengeance had consumed me. I was going to duck inside, get the truck keys out of the drawer, and drive away. Gibaldi's hitman could rot in the dungeon. Fuck Gibaldi. Fuck Nicky. Screw the world of people who hurt others because they can. Oh yeah, and fuck the vampire. She could buy the damn castle from the feds if she wanted. Besides, she had used up all the money I had allotted for doing so. I suspected she was getting a kickback in addition to the ludicrous amount I had offered to pay her. I was about to put all that money to better use, taking care of myself. And what about the people who destroy lives because they can? The voice in my head asked. Fuck you, I replied. Then I jumped when a voice outside my head crackled behind me. Fuck you? Who the hell are you talking to, son? Welcome home. I've got a stack of tickets with your name on them.